caught in this headship. The darkest depression, lost in the essence, caused by the tension. I try to walk away, but they blocking the exits. Is this all just a lesson? Probably not. I put this gun to my head, let me call it shots. I'm all alone, pissed drunk, drinking wobbly pops. Am I looking for attention? Hardly stop. But I don't know till I get some. Bacardi and Coke, that's red rum. Oh, you think I got it made now? Guess what?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Archons Corner. We were deciding if we're Wookiee-less or Wookiee-free. We're not really sure which one we are, but we got no Wookiee. But we do have Dr. Sheep, Big Z,
Hey.
and Ewok.
Hello, Keyforge community.
And it's kind of weird. We're right on the cusp of Dark Tidings releasing, right? I just got information that it is shipping from the U.S. warehouses today, which is May 6th. So most places should be expecting to see it on Monday because shipping is slow. There's no such thing as 2-day delivery points anymore, or 1-day delivery points. And then because it's business stuff, it doesn't deliver on Saturday. Kind of a pain. But all this exciting Dark Tidings coming on, but we're like, what do we really got to talk about? Because, well,
I also did get an email from my person that I ordered through. Something weird going on with my account, but we should be able to process my order tomorrow. So yeah, sounds like trucks are rolling, or about to be.
Yeah. So that's quite exciting that we have Dark Tidings, but on the OP side of things, there's no OP. All right, there's no big tournaments. We're still just playing with ourselves. Well, yeah, no official support, so we're playing online. Great tournaments going on there still, but
KFPL Top 4 will be aired Saturday. Tune in to Keyforge Premier League on Twitch. You can watch Dave versus
Jay Philippeg.
Yep. And then on the other side we have Lorenzo versus Matt. So all fairly decently known names making the top 4. Kind of what I would have expected for it to be Triad. Top level play. We had some pretty lesser known folks make it into the top 16 and top 24. But when it came to the top 4, they are all well-established players on their respective teams. That being United Archons, Reap Out, Italian Resurgence, and the Hamburg Atlanteans. Sadly, there's no SAS. Cheap. What happened?
Well, yeah, if you want to watch myself get totally annihilated, go watch my top 8 game versus Lorenzo, and you will see my ass getting kicked. His decks were well tuned to deal with mine. I did not draw better, and I packed my bags and went home.
I think you just need more shirts. The more draw better shirts you have, the more likely you are. Were you wearing your draw better shirt?
No.
That's why you lost. We now know the reason.
I've failed you all.
He was not wearing the proper attire to win on that day.
So this is a great plug space for you should all go ahead and get an amazing new Archons Corner shirt of Draw Better. So check out our merch.
I got the shirt and the Archons Corner symbol hat. The Draw Better shirt is awesome. I have not had a new hat in a long, long time. So I'm also happy with the hat that came in. Both were very good quality from what I've seen
really
produced.
For the price. Like, the shirts are pretty cheap. We've got it set to where we're not taking any commissions. So, the stuff is pretty cheap. It prints pretty fast. I'm happy with the shirts and the hoodie I got.
Yeah, I was happy with both items.
And you got choices. You got AC team, regular AC logo, AC team with Draw Better, and it's one of those places where they'll put it on 100 different items. So you get all kinds of...
Well, if someone would ever give me the information, I was going to make a Why I Suck at Keyforge shirts. So at some point, we will let you all know when that is there, and you can get one of those. I will definitely be getting one of those, because I suck at many things in relation.
Lately, I have been sucking at Keyforge.
Oh, you say that you made top 8. So first of all, congratulations there.
And then I got just beat. Did I even forge a key in 2 games? It was so bad, I don't remember. I was just tears
like
were
you
running
had
down
to
my
at least
face.
gotta-
I couldn't see anything. It was terrible.
Yes, you're very, very humble there. But again, you played well. There are a lot of people who would have been envious to be in that spot. And there's always a next season. You do have your spot. Some of us have to win our way back in.
This is true. My goal of not having to work hard in the qualifiers has been met.
Ever? Work hard ever?
Ever. Yes. But we're going to talk a little bit about, why Ewok sucks this week. You
Why is that Ewok?
A sucking at Keyforge tale for us?
I do. So I actually made it out for our recent Chainbound, played some DT. I guess the first reason that I suck at Keyforge is because I couldn't just go ahead and scan my deck and participate. So the whole AC community was extremely supportive. And you hear that laughter in the background telling you, yeah, they were not supportive. And it was a comical feat. But I was able to get it eventually scanned. And after much harassing, I was able to play the deck. And it was an interesting little deck. Nothing super exciting. But what was interesting when you're playing Dark Tidings against Dark Tidings, it started off with 2 different wins. So again, happy to see that start. And the deck, I could go ahead and post in show notes, is V. Musashi, the River Steward. So if you want to follow along, Sanctum, Shadows, and Untamed. It's got a decent amount of ability to control the tide. And you're seeing that with cards like Marshall Ewer. What is important to know, though, is that you have to look at the efficiency of your deck. And you have to know when to go ahead and change that tide and when not to. When I got into game number 3, cards did not line up, and I chose to go ahead and take chains versus just having cards, which I normally had in games 1 and 2 to be able to raise the tide. That had a drastic impact on the game. This deck did not have a ton of speed, and so you could see that playing out as just the loss of 1 card. And I had to take it twice. And I made a calculated decision. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of the impact of the tide and chains. But that is why I suck this week at Keyforge, because I did not necessarily play the cards that were there. They didn't come to me, so draw better. But knowing when and when not to take the tide and its impact on decks, because it's not just about having the cards with DT, but also can your deck actually handle raising the tide without the cards there, that you have to go ahead and use the chain mechanism. I did take a loss in that game, by the way, too.
I think the whole idea of the tide and the chain, really hard mathematical dilemma for players at this point in the phase. Because I talked a lot about how Curia is one of the most complex cards in the game when it came out, as far as playing with it, around it. And I've seen very high level players kind of stumble comes to that recently. And Curia's been around for a long time, since July, right? So I am going to be very interested to see if the learning curve, what that looks like for the average player, from the average player to the top competitive players. When are they taking the tide? Are they making proper valuations in relation to the benefit versus the effect on their deck? Because I think this is probably the most complicated part of any set we have. There's no set that has a thing like this. Period. There's nothing
I think
that is that overwhelmingly is power differentiating as the pips in MMR, because MM has created a bunch of great decks because of that mechanism. They're very recognizable and understand how they affect the game, and they just are what they are, and you play going forward. We don't know what that looks like in live competitive play because there's that unknown thing, right? We've never gotten to see that. So that could be also learning curve and game warping in a way that we have no way of basing. We've never seen it. But even with that element in there, I think this tide thing is going to be a very hard thing for a lot of people to grasp.
Well, I think that what we're talking about, none of this was sealed, so I could not count the cards that were in my opponent's deck that went ahead and raised the tide. But
no, that's not even what I'm talking about. Like just like like you have Chelonia or Deepwater Gruin. Like, is it worth it?
Well, and
at that moment.
Yeah, that's where our tide, the tide card mechanic was our topic for today. And I think it's extremely important for us to understand it's present in every single Dark Tiding deck. So that is the first most piece that we have to realize. It's present. It's that next card. And now we have another card that's impacting all of the set that is here. There are some decks, as I've been playing. Now, Dark Tidings is not technically released for us Americans. But again, thanks to some Canadians, my beautiful wife, I have a box that was given to me for my birthday. And so I've been able to play a number of those decks. I've been saving and kind of holding off. And I will tell you, it's very, very sad to consistently open Saurian decks in this set. But it has also given me time when I'm only opening one or maybe two decks at a time to play those decks and to see truly what some of the combos are that they wouldn't see the light of day if I was playing a little bit longer and I had opened mass amount of decks. I think the tide mechanic has been extremely interesting to watch players who are new, but players who are also experienced and their impact on, hey, am I playing Dark Tidings against Dark Tidings? Well, that has an impact on the tide mechanic. But then playing Dark Tidings against non-Dark Tidings has a different impact. And then you have, well, what's the impact when you have Dark Tidings that allows you to draw and then raise the tide with cards? And what's the impact by going ahead and chaining? And I think that's where you're talking about that Keyforge calculus, is that this is a much higher level piece of calculating. And then adding on the seal that we were in on Tuesday, it was incredible because I know the impact on my deck, and I could start to see the impact when I played the other Dark Tidings deck.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to be defensive at times and take the tide just because their deck can blow up, and you can start to see some of those combos. The reason I took it, and I'll put this out, I took 3 chains twice because the deck that I was facing against had the ability in Sanctum, which again, I love Dark Tidings Sanctum, had our good friends Larry of the Lake and what's the Sanctum card where Urian. Where Urian gains for a reap whatever its armor
shower
is.
combo. If you just say that.
No, we're not. No, that is not what we're calling it. We will use Larry of the Lake and Uriel. I will say the names, not
Urian.
Golden Shower. Yes, Urian. Urian. But what we're looking at is the ability to reap for a very high amount and to do this repeatedly across multiple Sanctum creatures. That is a reason defensively to take the tide and to take those 3 chains. But if you don't have the logos to be able to move your deck along, mine again was Sanctum, Shadows, and Untamed, it really slowed up my mechanics that I think I prevented myself from losing extremely early, but I essentially shut myself down for mid to late game because I had chained myself, even just taking it twice. And that was fascinating to see.
Yeah, that's I think what I'm talking about. Like, I know I say it a lot. It's like one of my things. Like, when I say Keyforge is about game losing decisions more than game winning decisions, like that, the fact that the tide mechanic exists constantly, every single turn, have to make it, whether you are making it or not, it is technically an active decision on whether you're doing it or not. It's not a passive one. So like not taking it is you actively not taking it, right? Like, because you are making that choice whether you know it or not. So I think that's going to just make it a lot harder to really maximize the skill level and value of the deck. Because like one of the games that I won playing a Dark Tidings deck, I ended the game with like 18 chains. But I got to a point where I knew my position, if I kept doing what I was doing to take the tide, was going to be so leveraged against my opponent, they could not beat me going forward. So I kept using like different, like the deck had the scientist that like flipped the tide. So I'd flip the tide, I would turn it back to me, There's tons of board stuff that allowed me to take advantage every time I gained the tide. Then I would flip the tide back to the other side. Then I would force Omni-Chainment back to me because I was never going to draw a card again. And that was fine. But I knew that if I kept doing that, I'd already won the game. Had I not done that, then my opponent, because I was also giving him archive cards because of what was going on. There was like 3 Hydra catalogers in play or something. But like deck compared to deck, like I knew at some point my deck was going to fire off the end game, which means I'm going to just force the rest of my keys from hand or whatever. But it's like that kind of like nuanced thing, like understanding like what is going on in the game, whether the chains are mattering or not, whether the 3, like, but early game, as I think you mentioned, like taking the chains early game is way more devastating because like you don't really know who's getting an advantage truly at that point in time because you can't have very good foresight of what's going to happen the next 5 turns.
I will second that 100%. The difference of chains early on versus chains late was the difference in me winning one of those sealed games and me losing one of the sealed games. I'd actually come back, JM, big shout out to you, man. He was up, and he was up big on me. More, I believe that it was 2-0, maybe 2-1 for our keys. And Seneschal Sargassa, which after a player raises the tide, a creature they control captures 2 from. That allowed me to stick in the game by being able to just take the tide. And I had cards that I could draw. In late game, I could take it without those cards because, frankly, I just lost 1 draw, and I already had the board established. I had everything set that we're just pushing for that 3rd key. So I think that's extremely important when you're taking those chains or how
when you're taking them and what you're exactly getting is a big valuation. I think what will help a lot of our audience kind of come to terms to this is like if they've played against or with Binding Irons, a lot of players understand the value of that card. It's a below average card in this game. The reason is because first 3 turns of the game, the card is amazing. Turn 4 to turn 6 of any given game, the card has absolutely average Keyforge value. And then the last 3 turns of the game, which would be like turn 7 to 9, most games end around turn 10 or 11, that card does almost nothing. So hence, if you average out like the basically nothing value with being completely average and then like fairly good, it is a below average card in general. So if you're going to take chains voluntarily in the first 3 turns, whatever you're about to do better be better than if someone was playing Binding Irons against you in the first 3 turns of a game in any other match of Keyforge you've ever been in.
See, that's interesting that you brought up Binding Irons, and for 2 aspects. One, I think Binding Irons is a much more powerful card in adaptive, because when you bid chains for that 3rd match, oftentimes people mistakenly forget that you have Binding Irons. So my adaptive deck that I had played for Shadow Worlds had 2 of them in it, and you can go ahead and send someone who thinks that they're right at their cusp, and all of a sudden you just pumped them with 3 or 6. And actually drawing that card was a difference maker in some of those games. That's huge. Ironically, I've also seen a couple well-known people in the Keyforge community actually playing some Binding Irons decks now against Dark Tidings. Mm-hmm. And they're actually pushing people that they think that they're dependent on getting the tide. And so if you take the tide with the chains, Binding Irons all of a sudden magically has a much larger impact because you're going from 3 to 6. And again, if you can hit that early, it is.
Well, a lot of Dark Tidings decks will stay chained, so it's not even the 3. Like they'll be in that 3 to 6 range. So if you hit them at 4, hit them at 5, hit them at 6, like boom, you're now going to be in a spot where you are drawing 2 less cards, and that is not going to be how you factored in what your game plan was. No way that was in your calculation. And then other cards that like they weren't as effective in AoA because Streak means you're playing an AoA deck, but Succubus was really good in several Discoda decks. That's another thing. Well, if you see hit the board, that is a problem for a lot of Dark Tidings decks. Like there is some pretty fun and effective creature control in Dark Tidings decks, but you know how things are. Like, if it's buried, if you don't see it, Succubus will help you not see it. There's like a lot of that stuff going on that is way more effective, specifically against Dark Tidings. All this said, there are several decks offset that there are going to be some Dark Tidings decks that come in and absolutely wreck their face. So, and I think most of that is to do with efficiency values. Like, if you're playing a deck that is not efficient, like you're already at 0 or negative efficiency, and then you're coming against a Dark Tidings deck that highly abuses the tide mechanic, like, taking those chains is going to be brutal if you have to. And there's a bunch of artifacts out there that you basically have to take the tide from them at least half the time, or you're going to get punished for it. Can't reap. They're going to gain free amber. They're going to forge for less. All kinds of stupid things happen if you don't do this.
Yeah, when you take the tide is really important. And I've seen in my games, people are either doing one of two things. They're either taking the tide way too much, and they're, because I have a Chelonia they can't kill, so they take the tide, and I don't know what the point of that is, because I can take the tide back, right? And if it's worth me taking the tide back, then, if it's worth the 3 chains to me, you're in a way worse position because you took 3 chains to give me 3 chains, but I still got my value. Or they just totally ignore it and never touch it.
Yes.
Right.
I think the safe spot, even if you're playing offset of Dark Tidings, is you need to really figure out what's going on in the deck you're playing against, and then make tactful decisions of when you're taking the tide. Most likely, the answer is not never, and the answer will never be take the tide every turn. You will just lose.
You just lose because of chains, and they get chains, but they get value out of taking the chains where you're not.
Well, and the other piece that we got to keep in mind is you have to do some Keyforge calculus and know the cards that are going to raise the tide. When you're playing against Dark Tidings out of set, no, some of these decks don't.
Knowing that they can raise the tide is a thing, but that doesn't really affect their ability to do it, right? That just means they get to do it on the cheap. And sometimes actually taking the tide when they have tide rating cards is nice because they're wanting the non-tide raising effect on that card. So I don't know if that's that much thing. I think it's more, you have to think about taking the tide based a lot more on the cards they have that trigger on changing the tide. Because I've played a few Dark Tiding decks offset where everything tide based in my deck is on tide change. So I raise the tide once, get some effects, but then you never take it away, and I never get to use any of my raised tide effects again in the game. And that's where I really think people I've seen not making great decisions. It's also not knowing the deck pool or the card pool well enough to know how many cards are raise chain or raise effects versus just high-low. But those changing tide effects, there are some decks that's where they're going to win the game, is on changing the tide. And if you let them set it high and you can afford to just ignore it for the rest of the game, that might be your best choice.
See, and I guess that's what I was talking about from my experience. And again, it's limited on play with what I've opened, what I've been able to borrow. But seeing other people's responses, and like, you can see that I have a couple decks that they love the tide to be in a specific position, but frankly, they don't have cards to move it to that position freely. And so if you can know what cards actually are going to benefit from having a high tide or a low tide, and then is there any impact? Am I just easily able to go ahead and do this? Or is it something that's going to require work from the deck? Because if I can look at the deck, and again, people are evaluating and learning the cards at this point in time, but that has been a huge difference that I've seen in my games when I'm playing people. People who know the cards a little bit better have a better understanding and say, well, great, I'm not going to change the tide because you only have one card in this deck that can raise it. So in order to do that, you have to spend chains to go ahead and do this every time. And your deck doesn't have the efficiency to do that.
Yeah. I mean, knowing if they can raise it for free does increase your value on raising it yourself, I guess, or it makes them pay chains.
Yep.
It's still one of these things, though. It's really how much benefit they can get out of it. Like, if you're taking it away for board-based effects that happen after they go into standard action phase, where they can raise the tide, it's probably not worth taking the tide away.
100% true.
Right?
Sure.
But if you're talking about the card that +1/-1 key cost and the card that you get in amber for the tide being high, yeah you gotta take, like, if they're, I mean, just having one of each of those cards means they forge at 4, right? If they have the tide high.
Yeah, specifically Mecha Buoy and Static Collection Array will force your opponent to take the tide way more than you, I mean, at a rate that is probably detrimental to their winning. There's just really good offset cards, especially depending on how much tide raising the Dark Tidings deck has of its own that does not cost chain. I've seen them to be somewhat game warping in my offset play, but for what it's worth, only in decks that can raise the tide themselves without chain 3 to 4 times at least.
Yeah, so let's run through. Mecha Buoy, in case you're not familiar, is an artifact, is a Logos artifact with an amber printed on it, and tide effect. At the start of each player's turn, if the tide is high for that player, they gain 1 amber.
Yep.
And what was the other one that you shouted then?
Static Array, Static Collection Array.
Which is a artifact, uncommon, amber pip on it, and says your keys cost -1 while the tide is high, and +1 while the tide is low.
If your Dark Tidings deck has 3 to 5 or more tide raising cards in it with those artifacts, especially if you have more than one, because you can get double of either of those.
There is no deck with double of both.
Yes, this is. It is really hard for low efficiency decks to handle what you're doing because you're essentially forging keys at -1 per artifact. Doesn't matter which one of those two you have; they essentially do the same thing. Static Array is kind of better if you're going up against Spring Low or Doorstep or Drumble type stuff. And the other one is better if you have like key cheat stuff going on from hand. But yeah,
there are triple Mecha Buoy decks.
I have played one for fun. It didn't have like enough tide rising for it to matter, so it was actually a really bad deck. But it was funny to see.
Playing this triple Mecha Buoy double Hydrologger one.
I think so.
That is kind of funny.
Yeah,
those effects that happen before they get the chance to raise or lower. That's where it definitely is. But like I said, the other place I really feel like I've seen mistakes being made is taking the tide away, allowing them to raise it, because there are a lot of very good raise tide effects. And
they're specifically in Logos and Starlight.
Even and
one guy
Sanctum
in
is good.
Unfathomable. That's two-sided as well, though.
Yes, but Amber control in this set is a little questionable as is. Often. Yeah. And like in the decks I played with him, he is one of my primary Amber control plans. And just by leaving the tide high with me shuts him down, right? Like,
yeah.
See, that's very interesting because my play, and I know it's not on the topic of tide mechanic, but I would argue DT issues right now that I'm spotting is large scale Amber control and board wipe. Both of those. Board wipe, you can have a couple, but they're a little bit wonky. And they're not in every single deck, or not the decks that I've been opening or playing. So those two components seem to be causing major issues.
They're more Star Alliance, man. They have the coolest wipes now. They're fun.
I think Sanctum does well enough on board control too often. I've done fine with Sanctum decks.
Again, I have a limited selection. Yeah, I have a couple boxes coming, so I'll be excited to play those. But I am
right now. My selection is every printed deck that is scanned. Like I don't own any, so maybe next week when we talk. All right, I think that's enough on the tide mechanic. Dan, you had something
just one last thought on the tide mechanic is tide mechanic is only in play if there is dark tiding decks in the mix. So if you're not playing Dark Tidings, there's just no Tide, which means Volocanth is still real good, and a non-Dark Tiding Volocanth in Worlds Collide is still very good, because the Tide will always be neutral.
Yep.
But the other thing to think about is if you are playing against Dark Tiding decks, do think about taking the Tide if it controls your deck flip. If you're playing in a Rise deck or a Grim Reminder deck, and you need that one more turn where your deck doesn't flip, remember the Tide is there. And that can, taking that one chain lets you play one more card, potentially, and not flip your deck.
It does kind of weirdly help out recursive decks at different points.
Yeah, it's not a huge thing, but in top-end play or some really tight games, I bet you it will be a thing. It will cause...
Infernus meta kind of shut down a lot of recursive decks, but there are definitely recursive decks that I know of that could be beneficial to take a chain, take 3 chains, 2 turns before you're flipping, just to give you more time to play around with your discard pile.
So that's just my other thought on chains. But the Tide card only comes with Dark Tidings deck. It only gets to be put in play if you're playing Dark Tidings. So if you're playing without that, you can't be like, I'm raising the Tide even though it doesn't do anything. The card does not exist. It's clearly in the rules that still haven't been released to us. But in the rules that we've seen, that card only exists if we're playing Dark Tidings.
And I'll go ahead and interject real quick and say, please know that when you're playing Dark Tidings, that Tide mechanic does not start at high or low. It is in a neutral position. It will require someone taking chains or a card being played for it to be active in a high-low position for the game. I saw a game that lasted quite a while before it was taken, and some people were dependent on the mechanic of raising or lowering the Tide, but with no one taking it, it did not have an impact until much, much later than I would anticipate. So kind of keep that in mind. It does not start facing one person or another. It is neutral.
Yep.
All right. I think we have covered our Tide cards mechanic. Shall we talk about a little Evil Twin?
Yeah, that's something I didn't know about. So talk to us, Dan. What's going on?
What do you got?
I saw over on FFGOP Twitter, so this Tweety thing. It's really Wookie's domain, but I got a cover for them. So they put up these awful non-stop moving videos, so you can't even hardly read the card before it flips back and rolls again. Drives me nuts. But they have an Evil Twin for Dr. Escotera, but it's for a house symbol that's a little triangle with an eye. So that or a pyramid with an eye. So that is with one of the next Keyforge adventure sets. So Evil Twins in the multiplayer Keyforge adventure sets coming up, and this one is Dr. Escotera, who he's a 4-power scientist cyborg like his regular one. But here my screen is rolling, so I don't know what it says anymore.
I can read it. So I paused it. There's a pause function, old
nice.
man. So 4 power, 0 armor, cyborg scientist creature. Prey, the rightmost creature with 3 power or lower. That's who we're going to be targeting. Play, your team loses amber equal to the depth of your location. So what's interesting to me is with the prey mechanic that's there, I definitely see it as another adventure to be able to go on, which is kind of cool. That's what immediately jumped out to me. What do you guys think?
So this means we'll never see a real Dr. Escotera twin? Evil twin?
All I can say is in the bottom right, and maybe it's just where I froze it, I'm fairly certain in the yellow it says conspiracy. So
yes, because that's the name of the next one is conspiracy.
I know. But that's trying to be playful there and put it in. So I'm thinking that it will be conspiracy. We'll have to see if that evil twin will show up.
When you say next one, do you mean the one from June?
Isn't the one from May conspiracy?
I thought I heard someone saying the one from May was about like a hatchery.
No, hatchery was a card that's in it. But I think it's for this one. Maybe I can scroll down. Okay, here we go. I've scrolled down. I found the tweet for the hatchery, and it also says conspiracy in the lower right.
All right, then. It's all part of the
They've
conspiracy
also released
for May.
they released a little teaser saying there's going to be a Mars-based one, and they also released another little teaser here, and it's got a picture of Simon, and it's got over the top of it, it says, "I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me." So Simon, he's the little Mars creature who stuns non-Mars creatures when he fights.
Simon?
Not Simon?
No, I thought Simon was shadows that when you attacked, you put the creature back on the top of the deck.
Oh, yes, that's Simon. I'm thinking of that.
Okay.
Yes.
Wait a second here.
So, but he is a Martian working for Shadows. So
he is. He's a Martian on the card, wearing the Shadows jumper.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of one. That's probably the June, right? I think they're releasing one in June. It's going to be Mars based.
That's cool. I've always liked Mars.
Mars is good.
Plenty of Mars decks in my roster.
Yeah, there is a lot of missing of Mars. I have to say, I'm excited. I have to give FG that it has been fun playing the Keyforge adventures. So to see that we can have conspiracy here with logos or whatever the icon's going to be, to see Mars being brought back, yes, dearly missed. These are great pieces, and I've been having fun with it. So I don't know about you guys, but another way to enjoy the game.
Yeah, I've got those 2 plays in, and I haven't really had.
We're gonna give it a run on Mother's Day, and goes. We're gonna smash it down with some fun decks.
Yeah, it was a fun distraction. I definitely like it better with other people than playing it by myself. So whenever I get to see people again, and I'll think about it. But it sounds like I have live play starting on Mondays, so I'm gonna have to just abandon all our internet friends and go back to live play.
For your store?
For one of our friends' stores.
Yeah. Pink Bunny Games, which John Palm is running actual events online on Wednesday, so we get to meet in person. Well, you guys do. I have 2 events going, but I'll be sadly missed. I will say, Simon, anyone at home, if you're not familiar, Shadows creature, Alien Thief. Simon, 1 power, 0 armor, skirmish ability, fights, put the creature Simon fights on top of its owner's deck. And it's got a sweet little alien, green dude, thumbs up, looking in the mirror, and get a nice reflection there. Sweet little card.
The art is better than the card.
I thought you never noticed the art. Only when it's that bad?
Y'all force it down me. I didn't know Simon was an alien until today. Or that there was art on the card. Anyhow, I think that wraps us up. Keep playing Keyforge. Come out, watch some KFPL games. Our next live event is sealed. Still $10. May 22nd. Dark Tidings sealed. So I'd love to have y'all join us.
And I think you have a leaderboard that's going too, that, even if you don't take it all the way home, you can have access to next season for
earn
KFPL.
Some league points.
That's right.
Top 8 league point earners will make it into season 3. So anyone that is not already in is removed from that pool. So a lot of the people that are top earners on the board currently are already in the event. So there's lots of spots to be had, even if you don't have like a ton of points. Because right now the 1st and 4th and 6th person on the leaderboard are already in season 3. So those spots shift down to the next people. So lots of opportunities between now and then. Get 2 league points for participating in any paid event, and then an additional point per win. And then you'll get a league point for participating in a qualifier, and then any 1 point per win in those events as well. If you participate in absolutely everything and don't drop any game, don't drop out, you are actually at a fairly high chance to get yourself in the top 8 on the league leaderboard point.
Yeah, I have to say, I just went ahead and went to Crazy Killing Machine, their little website. And after only playing 1 event, I'm very happy to be at 7 points. This is pretty sweet with 1 event in.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at this right without like staring too hard. I think the bubble right now is probably 11. Some of these people I will have a good chance to qualify other ways just by winning the events or whatever. So 10 is probably actually might be the range right now. So 3 points off of that from one event, and you're already fairly there. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to play in the first event, so we'll have to look at the next one and see what's happening, especially Dark Tidings.
Well, 'cause that's another thing to add. Like, obviously, when the qualifiers start up, we're going to have a lot of people enter the qualifiers. So any of these people in this top area that are on here and actually make it through the qualifiers, they obviously will vacate their top 8 spot here, and it'll just keep trickling down the list. So
we also have our standard Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday events. Tuesday, I am expecting to have sealed Dark Tidings decks available for the next Tuesday sealed. So if you want to play sealed Dark Tidings, come join us on Tuesdays.
Are you going to be going ahead and scanning in with the new app? Is FFG going to support us and have that beautiful QR code work, or are we going to have to manually do it ourselves?
I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. Right now, the old versions of the QR codes included the website as well as the 15-digit deck code. When they went to Dark Tiding decks, they eliminated all the website information. So it only has the 15-digit QR or 15-digit deck code in the QR. And they updated Master Vault to take that reading, but they have not updated Gem to be able to deal with that reading. So there is a workaround where you can go to a website and create a QR code that has all the information, so Gem will scan it. But it is a workaround, and as Ewok was saying earlier in this episode, he failed hard at trying to do it. It took him like 10 minutes to make a QR code, and we were all laughing at him and making fun of him, which I'm sure was not helping him get the job done when we were just being jerks.
And it was one of the few times I could actually be in earlier. And it did. It's a loving community. I know that I was well loved, and I still made it in. I still had fun. So please, regardless if you're worried about that, we'll walk you through it. I can see in the future one of us actually putting a video together just so people can see it. It's not difficult once you know what you're doing, but it's just not necessarily.
We did just give him 2 internet links and said, make this work. And nobody actually told him what to do with them.
So it sounds like Ewok will be making a video post somewhere for you all, so you'll not have the same experience he did.
Yeah, it's really not too bad, though. But what will help you? Please come out, join, have some fun with Dark Tidings, continue to learn those decks. And actually, I'll say on Tuesday, we had a range. I played against people with Dark Tidings, with Coda, with Worlds Collide. So out of 4 rounds, that was pretty awesome.
4 out of 5 sets represented in the last event. Nobody wants to play AOA. We had 17 people playing sealed and no AOA. But everything else was there.
No, of course not. Not AOA. I've almost sold every AOA deck I own except for like 4. So.
All right, well, I think that's going to wrap us up for today. We should be back next week with more insightful Keyforge thoughts.
Pressure.
Hopefully you found this insightful. If you have, please give us a 5-star review. Wait, what are we doing on that one?
Yeah. Wookie wants us to tell you to put 5-star reviews on everything.
Specifically, something Apple podcast.
Yeah, that's him. Just love us. Come out and play some Chainbound. That's what we're really about.
I would appreciate it on my OnlyFans account. Need some boost.
I just want people to play Keyforge. Buy some Dark Tidings. Get anything that's really good, DM me. I'll buy it.
Stay safe, everyone. Have some fun. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to some Vault tours soon. And FFG, thank you ahead of time for making Gem work with Dark Tidings. I know you can do this.
Leave.
Good night.
Anxiety. I've been going crazy and I've been feeling down. What the fuck is wrong with me? My time is running out. Everybody else just lives their life so carefree. Yeah, I blame it on the world, but now it might just be me. I said it might just be me. I've been going